All right, here we go for recapping week number 7, Friday Night Drive here on Shaw Local. Thank you for joining us as we take a look back at all the fun games and results and the kind of the muddy mess that we're looking at all across the state of Illinois. I'm Matt Rodewald. Steve Soucie joins me. Good to see you, sir. How are you this weekend? Do you enjoy a nice long weekend?
Oh, not so much. I mean, the weekends for me, I'm a little busy with stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't even realize what day it is most time during the weekend when we get going, because there's a lot of information to take in, a lot of information to sort through. And by the end of the weekend, I've read so much that I think my head's going to explode. So
yeah,
it's really, I enjoy it all, but it is a lot. So weekends are not really weekends for me.
Right.
That's when I'm in there. I'm dug in. I'm ankle deep most of the time.
It's not work if you enjoy it, right? So you don't even notice it after a while. But I would ask you
Not really.
just a personal question. Do you look up the Sunday after the pairing show to go, oh, we're in October?
Oh, I sleep the day after the pairing show. Like it's a 16-hour sleeping jag to make up for the amount that I had not gotten the previous 4 to 5 days.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive on in for some of the things that you wrote this week and just some of the thoughts that we both had as we look back. Some of the surprising results. There were some surprising wins, but really the thing that I noted was the teams that got tested all the way around the state. And you noted this as well when we were just kind of getting ready for it. What did you think about all the tests that we saw around the state? Some of those teams that kind of struggled to get out of there with wins, some that didn't.
You know, there were games that were going on and coming down to the wire, even on the broadcast on Friday night, where it was like, boy, I wonder what happened there. And that seemed to happen a lot. It wasn't just like one or two isolated games where it was like, boy, that was a little bit different than I thought it was going to be. It just felt like they just kept coming, so much so that when we got one of the bigger surprises of the evening, and we later found out kind of what the reason was for that, I'd almost forgotten about the Lions Downers Grove North game was even going on.
Yeah.
And then we got that information at the end that Lions had edged them out with a little bit of a second half rally, and there was an injury involved, but it was still one of those nights where it felt like a lot of those types of games were coming in where it was like you weren't sure if the team that was, you know, let's be honest, heavily favored was going to be able to get out with a win. Some of them did, some of them did not.
Yeah, Downers Grove North did not survive that one with Lions. So, and the conversation is Owen Lansu getting hurt, no doubt about it. But can we give Lions some credit for coming back from 2 touchdowns down to getting a win? And now they're sitting pretty atop the league there and putting themselves in pretty good position to be with a nice bracket potentially, and a good road and a potential deep run for them in November.
You know, if they can manage to get through York this week, I mean, they're in great position to be one of what I think is probably only going to be maybe 4 undefeated teams in 8A. I mean, that's a really good situation for them looking forward. But as we've talked about before, you never know what dart you're going to get thrown at you from one of those bottom seeds, because as we've talked about at great length, a lot of programs that we're used to seeing 8-1, 9-0, those same teams are going to be 6-3, 5-4. And so it's going to lead to a lot of chaos. So it's almost in a situation where you're not going to know this until pairings night, but 9-0 might not be the greatest thing for you. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You don't want to tell someone, hey, don't try to win all your regular season games. That's ridiculous. But ultimately, it's going to be really kind of more of a dice roll than it's been before as a 9-0 team. You're likely, the odds are going to be much higher than usual that as a 9-0 team, you're going to see an opponent on the other line. You're going to go, wow, I'm 9-0 and I got that. I mean, I think that the probability of that's going to be much, much higher.
I want to talk about the potential for 7-2 home games in the postseason and 6-3 home games down the road here. But before we get to that, I want to finish scratching the itch on the 9-0 aspect of it for you. 39 unbeatens right now. That's something that you calculated. Of course, you did the math. I don't do math past Friday. That's just not how I do it. But put it in context for me in terms of where we normally are in terms of unbeaten teams. Maybe 9-0, 8-1 type team. I should say at this point, 7-0, 6-1 teams that we normally would see this time of year.
You know, recently it's been a situation where that number slowly started to decline.
Come down.
I want to say as recently as 3 years ago, I mean, we would get to where we were through 7 weeks. and we'd have about 50 undefeated teams. Last year, that number trickled down to 43. We're down to 39 now. And I think that 39 number is really interesting in a lot of ways. One of the things that's real interesting about it, a large concentration of those teams that are undefeated are in 1A, 2A, and 3A. A very, very heavy, and I know why that happens. You usually get a little bit more division in the smaller classifications between the really good teams and the teams that maybe can't quite keep up with them. But what you're seeing now is you're seeing a situation where, 6, 7, and 8A, when we get to the end of the line, they could have ridiculously low numbers of undefeated teams. And then on top of it, not only are we seeing less undefeated teams, we're seeing less teams that are tracking to finish 8-1 as well. So that's speaking to the discussion that we've had all year long. It's more about parity this year. There are more teams that, like, when you look at it, you say, okay, that's the best team in the conference, but then let's have a conversation about who the second best team is in the conference. And instead of discussing 2 teams, you're discussing 4. And over the course of the season, if you're talking about 2 teams being right there in the heat for second place, or 4, that usually means that the race is involving a team that probably has 2 or 3 losses instead of 1. And if that happens a whole bunch of times, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get to the end of the line. You're not going to have many 0-loss teams to put in the field. You're not going to have very many 1-loss teams to put in the field. So then all of a sudden, the middle of that bracket, you're seeing 2-loss teams, and you're starting to see 3-loss teams. And that's something that has happened before, but I think we're going to get a lot more of them this year.
I mean, I think it's great for the overall product because it gives people the hope of, you don't have to worry about making a mistake or stumbling. You can, as long as you get in, you can figure out the path to normal. But I don't know, Soucie, that there's the romantic in me that says there's something about a 9-0, 14-0 season. When you hang that banner and win the whole thing and you have a perfect season, there's something special about that. And it's not to take away a state championship from anyone. Every coach knows it's really hard to win a state title. But, boy, there's just a little extra sparkle on it when you go 14-0. And I just love to see that. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't want people from shying away from playing each other. We love seeing Dixon and Johnston City get together, and they didn't have to this weekend. They did it anyway, and that was great. I think that was great. But there is still something about it that you want to find that happy medium, making sure that you have the cream of the crop, but still give people that opportunity to get to the postseason. I think it's just kind of swung wildly a little bit more than anything else.
I'll actually go the other way on that point. I think now when you do that, I think it puts even more shine on the accomplishment. The fact that you were able to kind of separate yourself from the fray and play at that high level 14 weeks in a row and stave off all these slings and arrows that are being shot at you. I think it's like right now when I look at that accomplishment that may come out of this year, maybe the last year, I put a little more shine on it. I put a little bit more like, hey, now that's really doing something, than maybe it has been in the past.
I mean, I called Nazareth's last 2 state championship wins. I mean, there's an amazing excitement about it, and they combined for 9 losses for both of those teams. So I don't take it away. I'm just saying that for me, man, I don't know, maybe it's the element of being where I am in a smaller community or in a football community where that sort of thing is something that you do have pride to. And I couldn't tell you what it feels like in Lena to go 14-0 every year for 3 straight years and go, all right, or being up in Richmond and going 12-0 and stumbling in the semis once in a while, where you did all that work and you came out with quote unquote nothing. So I see all the sides of the equation on this, but it's something that's fascinating, no less. And it's an argument in a corner tavern for a couple of old timers. I'll tell you that for sure. You also noted 102 playoff clinchers at this point. Where are we in that context as well? It seems that feels really low that we have teams that have not gotten to that 6-win mark to automatically lock in their spot.
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where you look at it and that number kind of fluctuates a little bit wildly. But I think when I'm really kind of drilling down on this, you look at, some of the conferences around the state and you look at how many situations there are where at the top of the league, the team in first place is maybe 3-1 in conference play or 5-1 in conference play. but they have that loss. And that's something that we really usually we don't have. We usually have like, okay, there's a 6-0, there's a 7-0, there's a 6-1, there's a 5-2. That is not happening as many times as we're used to. You look at it, maybe we've got a 6-1 on top, and then a 5-2, and then 3, 4, and 3s, like right behind them. So they're clustering in a different way. And there are more teams, it feels like, in a lot of different conferences. When in the past you could kind of look before the season and say, okay, I'm in a 12-team conference. These are the 6 teams that I think are going to make the playoffs before the season even starts, and be right a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It feels like now you get in maybe like a 10-team lot conference or something. You feel like you do a pretty good job of prognosticating before a ball is even snapped. These are the 5 that are probably going to make the playoffs. Maybe this 6th team sneaks in there. But now it feels like you got to go deeper in the list. Like as the season's going along, there might be 7 teams. There might be 8. And there's just this big jostle in the middle of a lot of these conferences. There might be 1 or 2 teams that have separated themselves. But instead of there being like a 3 or 4 team horse race for those last couple of spots that a conference will give bids for, there's like 5 teams in there that like could on a given day, kind of punch their way into the field. And that's what's, we've always had that happen. There's been a few of those conferences, but I could sit here and give you 10 of those conferences this year. And that for me is where we're different this year. We just have a lot of situations where we're going to get into these week 8, week 9 games. I'm just looking at it today. We've got 89 teams that have 4 wins currently, or trying to get to that 5th win mark. All right. 22 of those teams, of those 89, are playing another 4-win team just this week. So that just shows you how much churn we're going to have still going on in the middle, because not only are they playing 4-win teams, some of them are playing 5-win teams, some of them are playing 6-win teams. So that churn is not going to settle itself. We're going to get a group of teams from that 89 that are going to move up to that 6-win level, but it's not going to be as big as you think it's going to be. It can't be any bigger than 65. And then you got to consider the ones that are playing teams with better records than them too. So it's probably going to be more like 50. So we're going to have a conversation next week where we're talking about 155, 160 teams that are playoff clinched. And that is a crazy low number to be heading into the last week.
Let's take East St. Louis and Lincoln Way East out of the equation, the 47 to 49 point Griffins. Who has been the most impressive of the unbeaten group for you this year?
Boy, that's an interesting question. You're throwing me a little bit of a curveball there.
And as you think about it, I'll go ahead and set it up. How about that? In the sense of like,
teams,
there's talent,
have done better than I thought they would. And there are also teams that, maybe have not answered the bell. But as far as like a real clear standout, I'm not sure what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I would look at Byron just because of how dominant it's been. Byron stands out to me, but also when I look at this list too, I see a Sycamore team that's gone through a bunch of nail biters, and then when they needed to lay the hammer down, they did. They definitely did. And so the ability to win in a couple different ways. And I would say Geneva has one signature win, but they had a weathered an ugly one this past weekend in terms of effort, coming out flat in a tough situation, coming off that emotional high. So there's kind of that mixture, but who keeps motoring along, and we rarely talk about them? Naperville Central is sitting there at 7-0, and I don't know how good they really are at this point.
Yeah, it's one of those where you look at it on paper and you're like, hey, we've got Naperville Central sitting there going, I'm like, well, who have they, have they beat good teams yet? I don't know. It's very, the way that Southwest Valley schedule was set up was very interesting to me, because it feels like some teams are running a week-to-week gauntlet in that league. Every week I look up and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's another team that they have to play. And then there are others. I'm not saying Naperville Central's played a soft schedule. That's not
no. And I don't. I'm with you on this.
But it doesn't feel like they've had as many. And maybe it's a credit to how well they're playing. It just doesn't feel like they've had a lot of those backyard brawl type of games this season. Right. And like I said, maybe they're a lot better than I think they are. But, all eyes are pointing on week 9. Can they play with Lincoln Way East? I don't think we're going to get a clear answer on that until that actually happens on the field.
One of those teams that's unbeaten is Belvedere North. We haven't talked much about what's going on in the Nick 10, and because of it's a closed conference, we tend to have strayed away from them. And also, it's been kind of an odd season with a forfeiture in that league as well. And Boylan's kind of been on the way down a little bit. So is Belvedere North, who had a nice effort in the quarterfinals against Lake Zurich, probably should have won that game. Is that a team that can make another deep run in postseason in 6A?
It is so hard, particularly with that closed conference, to get a feel for how they fit in the mix. I mean, I've been wishing for years that they would go 12 teams and get some non-conference games in the mix, just so we can get a situation where we see what they do against other teams outside of the loop. Because, like you mentioned, there's been a hiccup with a forfeit. Harlem may not be as good as they usually have been. Boylan seems to be maybe a little bit down too, but maybe just by playing in a close conference, maybe they're all good and we don't know. I mean, it's like we have no real measuring stick to identify whether or not those teams are elites, good, down. I mean, like some of them have a pretty good pedigree in the postseason to kind of give you like saying, hey, some do, some do not. So it's like it's kind of a mixed bag, and that's another conference that there's just a huge glom in the middle. A couple of weeks ago, it looked like Freeport was on a free path to getting into the playoffs, and then last week they got roughed up by Guilford. Guilford, you look at their schedule. I mean, it's all like all these cross weaves are like you're looking at the results and you're like, well, are they better than them? Are they not? I don't know. I mean, there's a scenario where they could get 6 playoff teams. There's a scenario where they could get 3. I mean, that's how crazy that conference is right now in regards to, how it could all break down if one thing happens here and one thing happens there. It's so hard to answer that question. And it's always one of the things that I look at when the draw comes out is, how is it for those types of teams? When are they going to run into somebody that I think is problematic for them? And you never know. That they're one of the biggest mysteries heading into the postseason on a year-to-year basis, the teams that come out of that conference.
This is the Week 7 recap, the Friday Night Drive podcast. Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie with you. I want to switch gears because we just talked about Belvedere North being at 7-0. When you talk about the Catholic League, you don't talk about anyone being 7-0. There are no undefeated teams left in the Catholic League. That alone has to surprise you.
It does. And I mean, we were talking about before, you're just used to certain teams being in that situation. You're used to getting ready for that week 9 game, Loyola and Mount Carmel, where they're both 8-0. You're used to that. That's happened multiple years recently. So that's something that obviously isn't going to happen. So, you look at those situations and it's definitely not a great situation for them to be in. So, but what ultimately is going to happen, I was kind of breaking it down. They've already got I think half of the league is pretty much set that they're going to the playoffs already. And that speaks to the overall ability of most of the teams in that conference where they're it's kind of a war of attrition. Someone's taking a loss over here. They're taking a loss over here, but they're picking off a win off of these guys. They're picking off a win off of these guys. And everybody's kind of ending up in this middle mishmash where not only are they maybe getting to 5, but if they are ending up at 4, the fact that all the other teams that they play are winning enough games, their playoff points are pretty good. So if they do end up there, they're going to be high on that list. So it's definitely chaos. And what it makes interesting for is every week it seems like there are 4 or 5 games in that league, crossovers or in division, where you look at it and say, you know what, that could literally go either way.
I'm looking at the projections that you sent me ahead of everyone else, and I'm not going to give them away. But all I'm just going to say is I see a second round that's going in 7 and 8A that people are going to go, oh, come on. Really?
Yeah.
I have to do that. I have to play them now. I can't wait them to the semis or the quarterfinals. They have to come in the second round. That's basically what the theme of that is. But you know what that sets up is the attrition you talked about. When these teams get to 7-2 and 6-3, being 9-0 is not where you want to be, because that's where they're waiting for you. The sharks in the water, so to speak. When it comes to the messiness of the Catholic League, is there anyone that's surprising you in terms of being on the up and up? I know we talked about DePaul Prep, and they had a very impressive win over Carmel this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things when you look at the Catholic League, you think about like where maybe some of the hot spots were in past years. The thing that kind of went unnoticed this week, primarily because they got a forfeit win, was all this bluster that we've had over the last 2 years about Nazareth and whether or not they were going to make the playoff field. They just very quietly locked in their 6th win this week. They got it to be a forfeit, so they weren't playing, but it was like, oh, Nazareth clinched a playoff berth. And so much ink and voice was spilled over the last 2 years. Is Nazareth going to make it? Are they going to recover from being 1-4, 0-4, or 2-4, or whatever the heck it was? And now it was just like, all right, we're good, no problem. So it was that. I mean, I think one of the other teams that's kind of, and I talked about them a little bit earlier, was, Fenwick being 6-1 at this point in time, and their only loss was because they didn't complete a conversion against Joliet Catholic. So, I mean, they're dangerously close to being 7-0 at this point in time. We've got Mount Carmel this week. Really nice late season measuring stick for two teams that are already
really
in
good.
Playoffs. So it's like, you're looking at that. You're like, well, is Fenwick good, or are they maybe did they get lucky with a few breaks on that schedule or whatever? But we'll see. We're going to find out. So that's a very interesting kind of matchup here in week 8. But we'll talk about that later in the week. But definitely kind of a situation where most of the teams that I kind of expected to come out of this fray there are a few teams that haven't. That, to be honest with you, I'm a little surprised by. Carmel would be one of those.
Yeah.
I was kind of having an expectation that Carmel wouldn't be in the situation that they're in right now. They basically have to win out to get in now. And I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. But, there are others that have kind of stepped up into that void. Bennett, Marmion. Montini has had a little bit
really nice season.
Easier time getting through the schedule than I thought when I looked at it early in the year, because my first thought was, well, they got to figure out a way to get in. Well, they're in good shape for that. I mean, that's not a problem anymore. So now it's about, hey, how high can they get up the seed chart? Because they're in much better situation than I thought they were. I figured they would be one of those teams that would be like, we'd get to the last 2 and they'd be like, they got to split this. I mean, to get themselves in. They're not in that situation. So I think they've had a really kind of under the radar solid year in a situation where, in reality, I mean, say what you will about the system, enrollment wise, Montini is a 3A school.
Absolutely.
So they're not a school full, a huge enrollment school with a giant roster and all this other stuff. They're a proud, strong football program, no doubt about that. But the reality of the situation is they're dealing with some behemoths that have a lot more firepower than they do on a weekly basis in the Catholic League. So
Montini's schedule, some of the wins are Hyde Park, Hillcrest. Okay, that's a pretty good non-conference schedule for a 3A school. Yeah. And then you talk about what they did within league play, and then I'm not saying division play, but league play overall. Lost to Marist, lost to Fenwick by less than a touchdown. But then they've beaten Marmion, Carmel, and St. Viator, who had a nice start as well. St. Ignatius and St. Lawrence remain for them. And if there's any team that's wanting the Montini Broncos to win those 2 games, it's the Byron Tigers. They would like to see that far away as possible and not 5-4 and in your backyard in week 1. That's exactly the kind of scenario that you were looking at, similar to what we saw with Nazareth last year. And footnote with Nazareth, Seneca had had a forfeit this weekend too. I don't think that they entertain the idea of calling Nazareth like I got Rochelle and Marian Catholic to call each other.
No, I talked with Seneca briefly about whether or not someone was open when they realized that they were going to be open in week 7. And they asked me if anyone was open, and I told them, yeah, but I don't think you're going to want to know who it is. Like, yeah, go ahead, give me a try. And then I told them it was Nazareth, and it was just the response I got was
that's nice.
Yeah, so it was like, no, like that didn't happen, but I can't blame them for that. That's definitely not a situation that they would want. But
I just want to see that email. Hey, would you like to come play us in LaGrange Park on Saturday? thank you, but no thank you. I don't really feel that's a good idea for us. And I understand why, but boy, I would love to see it. I'll put them all together if I could. Let's switch gears a little bit because I do. And again, I promise we'll get to the 7-2, 6-3 home game aspect of it. But who wants to be the 1A or the 7A 1 seed? Anybody? Have you figured this? Is it just going to make Lincoln Park the 1 seed at this point? And what does this do to the matchups that you're seeing? It squeezes the bracket down.
Yeah, it does. And it's interesting because, I talked about this a little bit this week. Quincy has kind of been bouncing back and forth between 6 and 7. If they end up landing and staying in 7, I mean, they're the prime candidate for the 1 seed. The interesting thing about Quincy is that they're playing a pretty decent team from Missouri in week 9. And that's always pretty difficult to kind of cross-reference, hey, what's going to happen in that situation. I don't even know how big that school is. There might be a disparity in size. I'm not sure. But, when you have those week 9, there's a lot of schools that do that. They play that week 9 non-con game against Missouri teams, and then it's kind of a mix. Or you could be East St. Louis and play IMG. I mean, but that's basically what happens in week 9. It makes it kind of difficult to project exactly what's going to happen because,
right.
Who knows? Maybe the 25th best team in Missouri is a world better than the team that we're playing, and maybe they're not. Like, you don't have anywhere near enough data to kind of ascertain, what the levels are on those teams. You have a good idea sometimes with if that team is Cardinal Ritter or, somebody like that. You can kind of ferret that out. But when it's a team that's kind of in the middle of the pack and maybe a 6-2 team over in Missouri, well, how good is that? I mean, is it a good program? I know some of that stuff, but I don't know all of it. So
and we've gotten a feel for the St. Louis teams a little bit too. Vashon and all those schools. O'Fallon over in Missouri, but this is Capital City High School in Jefferson City, Missouri. They've got to go there. That's not a short bus ride either.
No, it's not, and that's the thing. I think this Quincy team is really good, and I'm not disputing that, but it's. For, the argument of the 1 seed, it really comes down to who actually is in 6A and who is in 7A. Because if Quincy's there, I think they're the clear one. If it's not Quincy, then I think, honestly, it might end up being Lincoln Park. They still have a somewhat 1 game left on their schedule that I think might be a little iffy. And you never know with public league schools. I'm going to be completely honest with you, especially if your name isn't Simeon, Kenwood, or Morgan Park. You're up for grabs. Lincoln Park has a solid program for a public league school, but also it's a program that has done well in the public league, doesn't have much success to speak for outside of it. So, that's really what, so almost anything can happen. So it's tough for me to hitch on that. It's like, Whitney Young is another team that might end up running the table. Yeah. But they have a very good Taft team in week 9 as well. I like that Taft team a lot. Their only loss to Stevenson.
It's a good program.
Yeah. So and they've been a pretty solid CPL team. Once again, another program that unfortunately for them is an 8A team and they get in the postseason. I mean, last year they were the first round sacrificial lamb for Lincoln Way East. But they're still, in public league parlance, they're still a really good team. So they could beat Whitney Young and knock them from the ranks of the undefeated. I mean, I suppose there's an argument to be made that if Quincy stays in 7A, loses that game, then all of them could potentially lose. We could potentially have no 9-0s in there.
We could.
And
You're
then,
right.
And then we loop back around, and then the 1 seed becomes the team that was the 1 seed before, like back in week 3 and week 4, and it's Batavia again. So that's the reality of what could potentially happen.
A quick nugget for you with Quincy 7-0, Quincy Notre Dame 6-1. It's got to be fun out there right now. That's a lot of good football they're going to look at.
Yeah, Quincy Notre Dame's only loss back in week 1 to Quincy. So, and I talked a little bit with the Quincy Notre Dame coach in the middle of the year, and he was asking me whether or not they would stay in 2A or move up to 3 or whatever. And I'm pretty convinced they will end up in 2A. I'm semi-convinced they're the best team in 2A. Like, I really do believe that. So, they've already clinched the conference championship in the Central State 8, where everyone in that league is at least a 4A team, and there are 5A teams and 6A teams in that league. and Quincy Notre Dame won their conference. I wasn't sure when they went in that realignment if they wouldn't get massacred in that league. And I understand why they did it. Independent life in Illinois high school football
is hard.
It's
especially
difficult.
Where they are.
Yep, it's difficult for them. It was hard for them to find games, and I knew why they did this, but I was concerned for them from a competitive standpoint. I was wrong to have that concern. This is a very good team.
Yes, and so combined 13-1, things are good along the Mississippi River here. All right, so let's get to it. 7-2 home games, 6-3 home games. What do we have to do to see, or what scenarios have to unfold at this point? It looks like some of those are already unfolding. Which brackets, and just a prognostication as best you can, would you see the most likely situations where we're going to have first-round home games where a team that is 6-3 would be hosting a playoff game in that first round?
I think some of it we can start with 7A, because if we don't have any 9-0s and we have a somewhat limited pool of 8-1s, logistically, you're going to have a hard time getting 16 teams that are 8-1 and 7-2. If you're already starting with a very small pool of 9-0s, the 8-1 pool is average at best, then you start to get into a discussion of, well, how many 2s are we going to have? How many 3s are we going to have? And we start to get to that 15, 16 line. It looks like it's very possible that we could have, 3 lost teams. And then you move down a little bit farther. I think it's very, very, very likely in 6A, 5A, and 4A that we'll have at least 1, maybe 2 of those games, just because of the fact that, once again, we're just having a really thin run of 9-0 teams. It's just, there are not going to be a bunch of them. There are classifications where there are tons of them. Like, for example, if you look at the 3A North bracket, and we talked about how many we had left.
Yeah.
About 7, I think it's 18% of the remaining undefeateds could end up in 3A North.
Wow, that's a lot.
So, that's what I'm talking about. It's very highly concentrated in certain areas. There's a bunch in 3A. There's quite a few in 2A. But the other classifications, there's just not a lot of them, and the losses are filtering down. You have fewer ones, you have almost no zeros, so it becomes more difficult. The pool of 3 lost teams is just going to be bigger. So they need a home. So if there are no zeros and ones, the 2s push up, the 3s push up, and that's how you get 3 lost teams win at a home game.
Yeah, there have been those years we've had a couple of 8-1s going against each other. I'm not sure you're going to see that this year in any of the classes. Maybe 1A at the worst.
Maybe
you might see that, but
it's possible.
But those are some fun years to see it. But also, can you imagine being an 8-1 team this year, no matter what class it is, and having to go on the road in week 1 in the postseason?
Oh no,
that coach is going to be calling folks in Bloomington Normal pretty quick about, hey, why don't we do it this way? To get things out. Let's talk about some of these individual conferences, because someone asked earlier about Rochelle and Canelan. I thought that was a really good question to ask. Was I surprised to see that Rochelle beat Canelan as much as they did? Jim had that good question there. I was certainly surprised, but kind of not, because of what Morris did to Canelan, and I just think Canelan's been beat up a little bit. I was more surprised that Rochelle could do that a couple of times this year, and it begs the question how good Rochelle is this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of permutations to this question. I mean, what Rochelle did in this game kind of validated what I was thinking that they could do. Didn't necessarily believe that they would do it. Right. I thought that they could. So, and now I'm kind of like, the thing about Canelan is I still think Canelan's a pretty good football team.
I do too.
But it gets a little dicey for them. I mean, you kind of look at what they have left, and before the season, if you would have asked me, hey, what's going on with, how do you think Canelan's going to end up? And I'm like, well, I think they'll ultimately be fine, but it's a deep conference that they're in, and, they have to put themselves in the best possible position that they can. But it's definitely kind of a situation now where I'm not nearly as sure about them. Not only as, I'm pretty positive they're going to get into the playoffs. I mean, but, they finish with a LaSalle Peru team that's really playing for something this week.
They're playing well right now, yeah.
And then they got to go to Belleville Althoff. And before the season started, that was a game where I was like, That's a nice game for Belleville Althoff to play in. I don't think they can beat Canelan, but I'll be completely honest. I've changed my mind. I think the fact that Canelan has to go to Althoff, that's a really good team. I mean, if Canelan has a slip up this week and drops to 4-4, it loses to the South Peru, they got a problem. I mean, it's a big one too. I mean, that's a situation. So, I mean, right now in my mind, I'm looking at Canelan and I'm saying they might be a 5-4 team in the playoffs on the bottom of the bracket, and that's another one of those situations where if I'm a high seed, am I real excited about a 3-14 game with Canelan? I don't think I am. Yeah,
and I don't think if you're Geneva, you want to see a Canelan on the bottom line of that, especially since they played him the last couple of years too. So there's a little too much familiarity. Oh, and the coaches are brothers. That's a big thing that you have to keep in mind as well. But Canelan at 4-3 and 39 playoff points. You would imagine 5-4. I think anyone who's 5-4 at this point would be a-okay to get in. But 4-5, where are we at those with that line at the moment? How many teams are you looking at? And how's that shifted a little bit?
It has shifted a little bit into not needing as many. But the one thing that you kind of have to take into account there is that right now, everyone is being given the benefit of the doubt.
Yep.
And this is not a season where I feel like that's a good philosophy. Like, I think we're going to have some results over the last couple of weeks where you're going to go, that really hurt them. Yep. I mean, that's going to be what I think kind of what's going to happen. And it may only happen 3 or 4 times, but those 3 or 4 times can be deadly for, those teams on the fence, because we're going to have so many fence games this year in the final 2 weeks where it's like, you got to win this. You can't afford to lose it. And instead of being on the other side of the field is a 1-6 team that you feel like you should run off the field, it might be a 3-4 team that's got a little pluck in them. And, and they're like, hey, we're still alive here. We still got a shot. Let's go get it. We got nothing to lose. I think you're going to see a lot more of those games this year where you got a team that really, really needs to beat that team to get themselves in a good situation, and they won't be able to do it. So that's where I think we're going to have – it'll happen this week. It'll definitely happen in week 9. The spoilers will come out, and it's just a matter of how many of them start to upset things. Because, I mean, last year we had that question was heading into the final week, and I knew as early as 9:30 on week 9 Friday that we were going to need 4 and 5s, and I've never been that confident in that ever before. Usually, I don't see if it's going to happen. I don't know one way or another if it's going to happen until Saturday morning usually. But I knew on Friday night, I'm like, we need them. It's just a matter of how many now. And I think that's where we're going to be here. I had 5 this week, basically, and the point total is pretty high, but I still think that number will probably expand. I still think we're going to end up somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 of those teams.
Next week, we'll be watching those 3 and 5 teams to see which one need to get that 4 and 5 line with the playoff points. So we'll have those circled as we get to that. Who wins the Kishwaukee River Conference? Because I have no idea.
I think it's going to be Richmond Burton. I think whatever they did, whatever they found, it is there. It's at least going to stay around for the rest of the regular season. I think it's going to be Richmond Burton.
Yeah, and that was an impressive win. Woodstock North, they still have Woodstock on the schedule. Again, 6-0 for the first time in school history. It has to be a demoralizing loss, but you wonder if this week's going to be a gut check kind of, this is what it's like to play with teams like this. Are we ready for this? And so this will be probably a good test for them more than anything else. They're starting to get votes statewide, so it's starting to get attention a little bit. I think, sometimes you get these teams that they come up a little bit, get knocked back down. The question is, how do they respond? I wonder how the Thunder are going to respond this week.
Yeah, it should be a good, you don't like to talk about like learning experiences and all that stuff, but it does. You do have to learn those things. You can't just pop up out of nowhere and say, oh yeah, we're going to run the table now, guys. No problem. I mean, you're going to run into some of these conflicts, and how you respond to those conflicts is probably going to be the determinant of whether or not this team finishes the season strong enough to earn themselves a really good seed. And then once they get into the playoffs, having an understanding that, hey, we got to bring it right away and all the time, or we're gonna see the same fate that we saw in that game against Richmond Burton. What do we do to avoid having that experience happen to us again?
Do we want to just flip a coin with the middle Illini and just kind of figure this out that way? Because you got Washington, Pekin, Metamora, and Dunlip all at 5-2, as you mentioned before. You got East Peoria. They started weren't they 3-0? Now they're 4-3, but they're in the mix there too.
They were 4-0 actually.
They were 4-0, so they've really come back the other way, and they probably know it more than anybody. They were probably willing to not correct me on that. Morton, 3-4, and we haven't said a word about it this year. But that league is all over. That's a perfect example of what you're saying in terms of you want a state microcosm, probably zoom in right there, and that's pretty much the whole state, right?
Yeah, and it's funny too because you kind of look at the games and like it seems like almost every week it's either there are 4 really tight games or there are 4 wide gaps, and then the next week it switches and then it goes back and forth. So you can never really get a feel of like who's got momentum because nobody's collecting momentum. It's just like they're just kind of like moving it down. Another week has passed. We haven't learned anything more than we learned before. Another week passes, upset loss, upset win. And then it just kind of bounces back and forth and the pendulum isn't moving very far left to right. It's just kind of, you have one of those spontaneous combustion machines where it just clicks back and forth really fast. Well, this is when it's at the end, when it's like not moving very fast at all. And it's just kind of clicking before it settles in. But, it's definitely a weird situation in that conference. You've got a lot of programs that have a lot of pedigree. So you're going to get games from week to week where it's like the margins are so slim and the results are coming in and it's like, 34-33. It's just like that's what you're going to end up getting. And then, in the long run, that ends up hurting them from a seeding perspective because I think all of them, like you said, all of them are at 5-2 at the top of the conference right now. They've probably got one game that they may lose. And so there's going to be a bunch of 7-2, 6-3 teams that come out of that conference. They're going to be in the middle of their respective draws.
Who knows?
And the probability of them potentially drawing each other again increases exponentially when you have situations like that. 7-2, 6-3s with same amount of points. That's screaming to be a 7-10 game. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation.
Yep. Hey, when I worked in Rockford Television, that was always the nightmare scenario for the Nick 10. It was that they would face each other. It's like, all we've done all year is face each other. We want to play somebody else. And so that's the one scenario they never wanted to see. We're going to end on this, though. We're going to end with the Fox Valley Conference. And my Central Rockets did some damage to Prairie Ridge. Have you been able to figure out this game at all?
No, not really. And I know we've had this conversation before where we're trying to stack that conference. And I mean, and you were reluctant to like make the declaration about where they stacked with Huntley. Well, now I'm like sitting here, I'm looking at it and I'm like going, well, they can beat Prairie Ridge. They got to be able to beat Huntley. I mean but then Huntley took Cary Grove to the brink. So it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't
know. This league's fun.
It's been really, really entertaining. And then just kind of like zooming through the middle and just saying, yeah, we played all you guys earlier. We're good. Jacobs is just kind of cruising right through the middle, just like going, you guys fight. We're good. We played you guys already. Let's go.
Y'all figure it out. We'll settle in 7A or wherever. We'll get Willowbrook or Addison Trail and figure that. That's exactly it. But for Central, they have not beaten Huntley since 2002. But again, there was a long stretch where they didn't play each other because Huntley really got big, and then Central has slowly come up in terms of enrollment, and they're just going to keep on going. But the other thing is fascinating is that when you put all the numbers together, this is a perfect case of, well, you saw them as a 5-4 team. Okay, well, I don't know the last time they've beaten both Hampshire and Huntley in the same year. They're two rivals, and they've got Hampshire this week for senior night, the first time they've hosted senior night with Hampshire since the 60s, oddly enough. I'm the sports information director for the school, basically. And this is the kind of scenario where you didn't have this in mind. So the possibilities, I know, for the coaching staff, they're talking, going, oh, so if now we could get to this mark and, well, maybe we get a home game in round one, whereas they're preparing to possibly go on the road. It just changes your attitude. Now, I'm very curious to see how practice goes this week for that school. And on the flip side, how does Prairie Ridge, respond to that? They have some get better games on their schedule here, but you want wake up call? Put 52 on you in conference. No one's done that in years.
Yeah, and it's kind of a microcosm of what's happening in a lot of these conferences where there are doors open to some teams that have been firmly shut in past years. Like where you would look at and say, okay, this is what we have left. We can split. We might be able to take both. And these are conversations that some of these programs have not had before. Like they don't want to say it outwardly, but like they look at the remaining schedule and say, maybe we can squeak our way to 5-4. And they're just being genuine and honest with themselves. They're not speaking those things verbally to their kids, but it's just, I think it's really intriguing. And there's a lot of case studies of this right in the Fox Valley where those doors right in front of them saying, hey, can we walk through this door? Can we get a W tonight? They're open now. They might be cracked open. They might be half open, but they're open. And in the past, those doors were firmly closed. And the response is basically, nice try. You can try the knob, but it's locked. You're not getting through here.
Yeah, Huntley's won 5 straight against Central. They've been, and again, Central's had those 4-5, 3-6 kind of the doorstep teams. So they've had them late in the last couple of years, and it's been close. I mean, not one possession games, but they've been in the game for 2.5, 3 quarters. So that's one where they could win. But Hampshire, their 55th meeting against their rival from 5 minutes down the road. Hampshire's, down in the dumps a little bit, but I don't know. They play weird games against each other. They played an overtime game in just a driving rainstorm last year, just to get Central to 4-4. So it's a very strange setup here. And if they can get in the postseason, these parts will be fascinating. And you could see Canelan, Sycamore, Geneva, all finding a way to play each other. And there's probably attendance would be up through the roof in some of these places. So that's probably what you're looking at more than anything else is the positivity of that.
I think there's going to be, and it's not isolated just to this Fox Valley situation. I just think there are so many of those things. It's like the spider webs that I could create out of like some of these scenarios that like could potentially play out over the last 2 weeks. And they're not isolated to a certain area or a certain classification. They're all over the place. There are so many of them. It's like, it just kind of look at it. And it's like, I have a hard time like pulling myself away from scoreboards on Friday night to even talk about it because I'm so interested in seeing, that's going to do that to that to that. And then, oh my gosh, what's going to happen with that? And I just think there's going to be so many fascinating turns of situation. And I know in the past we go into week 9 with, maybe 20, 25 games where it's 4-4, 4-4, winner in, loser goes home. There might be 40 of those this year. There might be 50 of them. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. I think we might have an entire schedule just full of these games where it's like winner in, loser goes home. Winner might be a 6A team. Winner might be a 4A team. So then you got the bubbles moving around, and it's all these. It's just like I said, just spider webs, just all over the place that just could shoot out in all kinds of different directions and create all kinds of different shapes.
All right, well, that's enough for us. Where are you going this week?
I have not decided just yet. I was thinking about, I don't want to make Wilmington twice in a row, but 7-0, 7-0, even though I don't know if Mantino has much of a shot of getting them, it's only 10 minutes from my house. It's kind of appealing, to be honest with you. It's not the Motorcycle Forest Preserve, but it's still that situation.
That looked fun this weekend with Coal City, I'll tell you that. And I'm probably going to stick with Central Hampshire just for the work obligations. But more than anything, I'm interested to see the atmosphere for a team who hasn't been to the playoffs in 10 years. What is that building going to feel like? It should be rocking for at least the first half. So I will catch at least a half of that and then head back here and stay with you probably past 11 o'clock so we can sort some things out because I know that week 9, we're going to have to be doing that deep into the night together. I'll do it with you. I'll do week 9 with you as long as you want to go. How about that?
I think I might introduce you to the playoff spreadsheets this week, Matt. So
there we go.
That might be your indoctrination to what we do on week 9 because that's pretty much what we do all night. So looking forward to it, and obviously week 8 looks to be pretty intriguing. So I'm looking forward to it.
It's a good slate. I'll check my email. You at home, make sure you check out the brackets that are coming, the projections. You're going to look at those and go, oh, man, there's a lot of good ones there. So for Steve Soucie, I'm Matt Rodewald. This has been the Week 7 recap, Friday Night Drive podcast here on Shaw Local.